3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
And welcome back to a special bonus segment of Dreamseed VR with me, your host, Sara Phinn. And today I am going to lay down an epic story time. Now, this is a story that is really close to my heart, but it also is very controversial. And when I say controversial, I mean scandalous. And when I say scandalous, I mean outrageous. Outrageous, let's just call it that. So I am going to tell you about the time I was overdosed on acid, LSD, back in 2009, the very end of the year, 2009 going into 2010 for New Year's. Now, this was a decade ago, and I was a very young psychonaut sprout. I had probably tripped on LSD less than 10 times prior. The most I had had up till that point was probably about 3 hits. Now, before I go into the story, I want to iterate that in no way, shape, or form am I condoning the use of illegal substances. I say this to just cover my own ass. I'm not discouraging it, but I'm just saying, obviously, because of legal circumstances, that's for you to decide whether or not your journey as a psychonaut is worth the legal ramifications of enjoying entheogens. There's a lot of hope in the near future that these things will become decriminalized, as we've seen just this past week in Santa Cruz. Woo, Santa Cruz. But, yeah, enjoy at your own risk at this point in our draconian drug war. So, let's set the story. This was 2009. It was New Year's going into 2010. I lived in Santa Cruz, and I was at a Renegade in the woods. It was an incredible crew of people, really amazing music, and just a beautiful forest that I was already very familiar with from previous events. And in general, I was in a very good place in my life psychologically. I wasn't dealing with much depression. I had a good group of friends. I had good relationships with all of my friends and family. So essentially, I had a really good set and setting just by the grace of grace. So at this event, I decided I wanted to partake. And my friend, who will remain nameless, accidentally squirted a little bit more than half of a liquid vial of LSD on my tongue. Now, this was towards the beginning of the evening, obviously. It was in the dark, and it was one of those moments where you just stick out your tongue, and your friend goes to do that. Forgive my tongue. I had a turmeric latte earlier. I don't know how turmeric-y it looks. Anyway, so what should have just been the sensation of a couple drops on my tongue was immediately the sensation of a lot of liquid on my tongue. And I knew that my friend had accidentally squirted much more than anticipated on my tongue. So instinctually, the first thing I did, yes, it was not necessarily the smartest. It was kind of naive. I've been told by friends if I had swallowed it, my stomach acid would have just taken care of quite a bit of it. But what I ended up doing was wiping it off on my hand and then my hand onto my pants. Now, I felt the sort of like mintiness of the fluid immediately. I know that LSD is tasteless and colorless, but it was being put in a little mint dropper like you do back in the day. That was like an old school thing that we still did at that time. I don't know if people still do that, but I felt it on my hand. I felt it go on my pants. I was like, oh, well, maybe I got some of it off. Now, there's not really any way of knowing how much ended up on my tongue and in my system. And for many years, I tried to wrap my head around the math of just exactly how much did I probably ingest. Now, I tripped for about 5 days. It's true. None of this is fucking make-believe. I have no reason to make this up. I had no reason to have this experience happen out of my own will. This was an accident. It's an accident on my part, an accident on my friend's part. shit happens sometimes. Be careful when you dose people. And I, after many years of consideration, came back with the math that was a little bit over half the vial that ended up on my tongue. And in a typical vial, you have about 100 hits. So I'm guessing it was about 60 hits of acid. Your typical acid dose is 100 mics. Therefore, it looks like in the neighborhood of 6,000 mics was put on my tongue. Now, if there's any kind of YouTube clout fairies out there, please give me clout for this bullshit, because that would be cool. This was an incredible story. I'm feeling a little brave to share it. It did happen well in the past. This past New Year's was the 10-year anniversary of this happening to me. And it was beautiful and life-changing in a lot of different ways, but it's a story I've kept very close to the cuff because of the outrageous nature of it. So what happens to you when you have 6,000 mics? I immediately went to my friends and I explained what had happened. I knew I had a very short window of being coherent or cogent or whatever. So I went to all of my companions that night. I gave my keys to my then boyfriend at the time. I let him know what was going on. I told everyone not to worry, and that if anybody was going to be okay, it was going to be me. So I was not really in the company of people who were very like maternal or mother hen types. So it's not like anybody was like, I'm going to take care of you. You know, they were just like, all right, you got this. You say you're good. Fine. And I went off on my little merry way, essentially by myself throughout the evening. But I was a bold little sprout, like I'm telling y'all. And I decided that if I ever encountered a moment where I was having difficulty seeing my surroundings, or that I became unsettled, or that I needed to just like take a moment, that I would take a moment. I would stand there and just breathe and look around. And when the visual circumstances made sense again to my mind, I would proceed. I treated it like climbing a mountain. And if you are like a mountain hiker, climber type, and you end up in a little bit of thin air and you need to acclimate and chill out for a second, catch your wind, and then keep going, that's what you do. And so that's essentially what I chose to do with this experience. Now, initially, I'm going to redact any names, obviously, just for their sake. I ran into a friend of mine, and they told me that they were going to be tripping on L as well, although they were just going to have a hit. I was like, oh, cool, rad. And they didn't happen to have anybody that they knew immediately at the party. They came by themselves as well. And they also came cross-dressing for the first time. Now, this person later on went on to identify as trans, which is super cool. Go them. But it was interesting because they confided in me that one of the reasons that they felt brave enough to show up to the party in cross-dress and experiment with their hair and their makeup as well as their clothes is because they had been admiring some of the really weird makeup that I had been experimenting with in the past couple of years. Now, in my early 20s, I was really obsessed with DMT, and in particular DMT elves. And I had this really strong passion for fancying myself a DMT ambassador. And so I would dress up as a DMT elf for lots of, like, any excuse. Finn would dress up as a DMT elf. And I would take cool pictures of my weird eye makeup looks. I was very into teal and purple at the time. And this friend loved the androgynous nature of the makeup and the hair and the alien look that I was going for at the time. I had really short hair that I would, alternate between weird platinum blonde or dyeing it to look like an aurora borealis, stuff like that. So this friend confided in me that they had been inspired by my makeup. I thought that was super dope. I was flattered and honored. We were hanging out, and the L started to take hold. Now, people who are familiar with LSD know about the fractal nature of the visuals, that everything breaks up into these beautiful tiny fractals as if somebody's blown sugar on everything. And sometimes things have hues or auras of like rainbows and stuff. Everything's also in a crazy high def. And I mean, everyone's mind is different, but that's sort of where my mind goes with it. So I was hanging out with this friend, and I spontaneously decided to create a magic mirror. I have no idea what I was doing. I was just going full blown, guided by spirit moment. And I was like, yeah, let's sit down and I'll have you sit in front of me and we'll line up our center symmetry lines. And, we're just going to have this empathic channel moment. And I'm sitting with my friend and I'm looking at their face and I see all of these tiny glyphic glowing runes in a way, like little, they appear in my art a lot. I draw them quite frequently, but they're kind of like, they look like ancient Sumerian or cuneiform little glyphy things. And they were on scrolls, and the scrolls followed the line work of their face. And they would make a facial expression, and the glyphs would morph with their facial expression. And when I saw that, I just started reading them without using like any linear linguistic part of my mind. It wasn't like left to right kind of reading. It was very much intuitively downloaded into my being what the shifting glyphs meant when the person's facial expression would change. Now I'm reading these glyphs and just very candidly speaking to what I'm understanding from them. And it was a lot about their gender journey and how they wanted to express their femininity but felt closed in by society's standards for their behavior as well as their expression. And I sensed a lot of hurt in their psyche and a lot of fear. And so I just spoke to that in a way that I wanted them to understand that I heard them and I felt them and I understood, and that it would be okay. And I shared with them some interesting things about the natural world that I thought would be inspiring regarding the way mycelial networks operate and the way that there are multiple sexes within mushroom colonies and that all of them are necessary to create new genetic combinations for the spores, and that I felt that human society might someday have a similar phenomenon where we can let go of a hard binary and transcend what is typically seen as the hard roles that society asks us to do, and that all of the different anatomically embodied beings would be able to culturally express their identities and their particular personalities and colors and shapes and textures and clothing form and just attitudes and tones of voice and just everything be free, and people not be stuck in rigid stereotypes as what means what. So I shared that intuition that I had for society back then 10 years ago, when it was not very much spoken about, or if it was directly within those communities. Usually it wasn't spoken to or by rather cisgendered people such as myself. I went to Santa Cruz. It's a really progressive school, and so it was definitely a big part of the culture and in turn social education of that university. So I spoke with my friend quite at length about that, which was beautiful because I saw them really absorb and feel the camaraderie and the understanding that they didn't have to be afraid of that, and that I recognized their I don't want to call it bravery in the sense of being petty, but no, truly, like it's challenging for anybody to step up into themselves and to share the unfiltered version of their personality and their soul. That's a hard thing to do because we're all afraid of rejection on some level. So it was very brave, and but I wanted them to know that sincerely rather than just it be lip service paid, right? So that was a really big part of the experience, was having this semi-psychic moment, reading these glyphs on my friend's face and sharing with them this this empathic experience. Bless my friend. I scared the shit out of them shortly after, because as I was having this experience with them, I realized that there was a multi-channel thing going on at the party, and I could tell there were other people who were semi-psychic, and they were tripping balls too. and I could feel them like little nodes in a larger network that felt kind of like radio signatures. And they would be a little node, it would be a fine, thin line. I'm getting like goosebumps over this. This is like a really big deal for me to share this because this is Crazytown. This is, when you talk about experiences like this, people think you're fucking nuts. This shirt, parental advisory, you know, yes, like, this is the forbidden shit. Nobody's allowed to talk about this lest you enter Crazytown. But you know what? I'm brave enough to go there because this was my genuine subjective experience. Now, I noticed there were multiple nodes of people who were semi-psychic at this party. They were probably on a lot of drugs too. But regardless, there was one in particular, one signature that was like, and I thought, that's the DJ. That's the fucking DJ. All right. And I spoke to my friend and I said, I feel like I can tell the DJ here mentally at the party. I can feel them on their groove, you know? And I feel like we're all psychically connected. I'm going to pull an experiment. And I know it's not in any kind of etiquette or whatever, but I'm going to stick my foot out and proverbially, metaphorically, trip the DJ and see if it affects their set. And then I'll have a little bit of feedback that, oh my gosh, we are psychically connected. I just bumped into that person etherically. But the trick is that you got to count it off, right? It's got to, you know, trying to have structure to this moment. It's not just willy-nilly. So I spoke to my friend and I counted it off. I said, I'm going to do this, you know, on the count of blah, blah. And I'm like, 1, 2, 3. And I did it. I stuck my foot out and I tripped the DJ. And there was like a train wreck moment and they fucked up their beat exchange. And the whole party went, ooh, the way you hear at parties when the DJ messes up. Bless you, DJs of the world. I'm sorry. And I was shook, y'all. I was flabbergasted. I couldn't believe that had just happened. And I felt embarrassed, like, oh no, like, I just used this poor guy's set as my fucking guinea pig moment for whether or not this psychic connection is real. Definitely rude, definitely not etiquette. I feel bad about that on a level, but at the same time, it was the first moment of confirmation for me that this was a real phenomenon happening. And my friend had been sitting right there watching, and I counted it off. So shortly after, I thought and said to myself, this is terrible. It's not science unless we try it again. So I did it again. And yes, it worked again. And I counted it off. My friend, needless to say, was terrified. I feel so bad. If by some weird chance of fate you happen to see this ever, even though I doubt you will, I'm so sorry that I scared you. That was not my intent. I was just a very high, silly little acid head trying something experimental and wanting to know if that phenomenon was something that could have evidence in the material realm. So thank you for being my witness. I'm really sorry I scared you. Now, later on, I ended up letting my friend go on their way. I wasn't trying to make them feel like they had to babysit me. And I started wandering around this lovely party, getting higher and higher and higher. This was probably like 2 hours in, right? I started to feel it initially within the first 10, 15 minutes, I want to say. And I could tell it was really going at about 30 minutes. So we're now well into the exponential curve climb of it. And there were a couple moments when I definitely needed to stop what I was doing and just stand there and look around. And oftentimes the fractals broke up the forest to a point where I couldn't really see the ground. I couldn't really tell what was what or where the trees split from one another. But it was really beautiful and I felt safe. I didn't feel in danger. I felt grounded enough in my body that I was aware of my spatial relationship to myself, right? Now, one of the things that is probably the most memorable and beautiful part of this story that was sort of outside time. So it definitely was beginning to happen when the psychic awareness started kicking in, but it remained a factor in the trip for a number of hours. Now, at some point, and I'll definitely share a little video insert of, I'll probably do it right here, of what this looked like, kind of, and what this felt like, kind of. Now, I grew an antenna made of crystals and antlers and spider webs and feathers and scales and all of the animal kingdoms, essentially. And it was this giant biomorphic fractaline antenna that grew out of my head. And it definitely became the inspiration. Oh, I got goosebumps again. Don't get emotional, Sarah. It became the inspiration for many years of headdress making. I became really into headdress making because I wanted to express what that antenna felt like. And it was etheric and iridescent and see-through and ghost-like and like ectoplasm, and just it reached not only just up, but it reached up to the galaxy, and it connected me to the universe. And when I felt it unfurl, I had this really profound moment where I sort of stopped everything and I thought, wow, that's the birthright of the soul. Everybody has one of those. And it was really beautiful because I had never witnessed that deep, beautiful, intrinsic connection in a visceral way. Even though it's like attached to my head and going up, like it's almost as if I could see it in sort of like a spiritual x-ray, you know, emerging from my head. And it was easily the most beautiful and validating experience I'd ever had in my life up to that point. It made me feel like everything was going to be okay. And not that I thought that things weren't at that point. Like I said, I had a really good setting going into this experience. But, oh, look at my little shiny eyes. Oh, man. It was beautiful. So, that sense of this unfurled antenna of like animal spirit and mineral and fauna and, you know, mycelial, all the animal kingdoms, this giant antenna. It lasted a long time. I mean, I still feel like it's there, you know. But I spent many hours of the party till dawn, just hanging out, walking around. I wasn't very social just because it was challenging to, you know, talk to people without getting really philosophical. And everybody was in hardcore party mode. So bless them, bless their base party mode. I ran into my boyfriend at the time, and he had been enjoying MDMA that night. And I found it really funny that it felt like we were on two different planets. It felt like we were different kinds of aliens from different planets, and that even though, you know, there's lots of love and affection at the time for one another, it was difficult to communicate for that reason. And I ended up having him drive us home many hours later in the morning when everybody was feeling more capable. But I was still tripping. I was still tripping balls. And, pardon me, I did not sleep for technically 3 nights. The first 2 nights, I stayed up, I wrote poetry, I hung out with my cat. I was just like a weirdo, right? And the boyfriend slept, and when he would, you know, be awake or whatever, I'd be like, oh, I gotta tell you these cool thoughts, blah, 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 blah. And I remember explaining the tree of life and like the chakras and the significance of color in human culture and the vibratory nature of it and what the different colors represent. And I remember telling him about this comic I was reading at the time, Promethea by Alan Moore. It's going to be featured as one of our recommendations here shortly. And I also, bless it, I'm very lucky, I spoke to my father New Year's Day. We had a really amazing many-hour-long conversation about semantics and the nature of language and the origins of words and the synchronicity of many words having these kind of like punish overlays. Really cool. And I even had a weird psychic moment with my cat one of the evenings, little black cat named Luna. And it was interesting because every time I would get caught into this swirl, this like really deep psychedelic interface with the materia, she would get anxious and she would express her anxiety to me. And so it was like her saying like, whoa, witchy girl, slow the fuck down. And I was like, okay. And I would slow down. And then I would get sucked into it again because, you know, I'm like the hype queen of alchemy. And she was like, you gotta roll slower. And so it was this amazing interface, you know, where she was recognizing me stirring up the psychic pot, and she's like, chill out. And then let's see, so this is the last little interlude of the story. Now I know you probably expected something more grandiose, but words don't really do it justice. So just, you know, the highlights being cool psychic scrolls on the face, cool weird biomorphic antenna, like psychic moment with the DJ, and coming home to the semantic conversation, and then the Promethea breakdown, all kinds of cool shit like that. But there's also this really strange moment where the night before New Year's, I had a nightmare that I was in a theater class as a high school student, and this creepy guy in a double-breasted old school wool coat had come to the class and asked to speak to me by name. And he tried to interrogate me about DMT. Like, what do you know about DMT? And I'm like, DM what? And of course, it's a theater class, like, you know, actress. And I was like, DM what? Dimethyl, what? And he knew that I was giving him the bullshit. And I knew that he knew that I was giving him the bullshit. But there's no way for him to prove it. So I was just like, whatever, this is my line of defense. You're going to come at me trying to incriminate me with knowledge. Like, thought crime is not real right now. Sorry. And it was very intimidating. It was scary. It was a nightmare. And there was a moment when I looked at his arm and I could see under his peacoat that there was a tattoo on his forearm. And it was of this like power fist, right? And on the power fist was a tattoo of another fist. And in that it was tattooed. The tattooed fist was tattooed. And it had all these weird Cyrillic letters on it. For those of you who don't know, it's like Russian letters, right? And so there was like some weird backwards P and a backwards like, you know, other letters. And I was wondering, what is that? What does that say? And it was really intimidating because it was very thick, bold, red letters on this like fist, and it was also thick black line work as well, like blocky black line work. It was terrifying, and I knew it was some kind of weird secret society tattoo. And the dream felt like it had a lot of meaning when I woke up, and I thought, what was that? And so the nights following my experience, I decided to look into what those letters could have been. And so I took a mirror and I took my sketchbook and I started drawing letters. And I eventually pulled out of my insane high recall acid brain the visual memory of what was on that guy's tattoo. And when I held up the mirror to it, it said portrait of the true self. And I realized that it meant that guy, that manifestation of my greatest fear, which is being hauled away for being a psychonaut, okay? That was a reflection of the self. And it was the portrait of the true self. And I realized that it was a lesson to shed your fear if you want to be in touch with your higher self. And I found it really ironic that the next night I got dosed with what's essentially like a Woodstock level dose. Okay, the accidental, oh no, you're gonna trip all week moment. the thing that some people don't recover from psychologically, that happened to me. And that I was somehow blessed with a good set and setting and a beautiful forest and an experience that really shaped me as a young adult for easily the rest of my life. Like, that was a life-changing experience. Not that it changed any trajectory or course, but that it was one of the most life-affirming experiences that I ever had as somebody who had already made the choice to become a psychonaut. So that is my 6,000 microgram acid story. And thank you for watching. I know it was a longer video. It's a whole freaking half hour. I might split this up into 2 parts. But thank you for listening. I'll definitely make a point to share some other interesting autobiographical stories with you through Dreamseed. Please check out the rest of the content on the channel I've created, as well as the website. It's www.dreamseedvr.com, where I share news and philosophy about the intersection between virtual reality, cyberpunk culture, and psychedelics. If you enjoy this content, please support me on Patreon, because without you guys, it makes it much more difficult. This is a labor of love. I'm not planning on stopping at any point, but all of your support makes it possible for me to do cooler and crazier stuff for the channel. But yeah, stay tuned for more stuff, and thanks again for watching. We'll catch you next time.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.